Okay, you ready? It's mic time. So it's okay. There's no right or wrong answers. So don't feel bad if you totally screw it up. I'm going to pick on the two of you because you scared your third friend away. So, or I did.
So we're going on the need for caffeine availability at major conferences. So our first paragraph
Perfect.
is our first paragraph is basically to the effect of you need to go to conferences for CME for education. Second paragraph is the availability of caffeine is lacking, especially with the speed at which it's available. And then the third paragraph is...
Well, the third paragraph's your study.
The study is we're
trying to find better, we're trying to create better availability of caffeine at the conference to encourage better.
Okay. So as long as it's not a randomized controlled trial and I'm not in a placebo arm, we're good. So the fact that they took something that's kind of fun to work on is a great thing. And when I've done this in small group seminars, we actually have groups of students make up a silly idea and vote on the idea. It's really hard as the professor leading it because it always has something to do with sex. You know, and so keeping a straight face during it's hard. So caffeine is way safer for a national meeting. So I thank you. All right. Yep.
All right. So our first question, okay, fine. We were talking about medical education. So the question is, there are lots of residents, our first statement is there are lots of residents in this country, and there is no good way to evaluate the quality of care delivery from residents single-handedly. So the next paragraph would be the literature that's been done on resident education and what so far we know about the quality of care delivery from residents, and then a third paragraph would be our study evaluation, and we decided that we would look at, we didn't come up with a great way to measure this, so we just decided 72-hour turns for resident care would be a way to start looking at quality of care for residents.
Okay, great. So I'm now going to show you, and this you get to see now. It won't be in the app after the meeting. This is an actual paper that I'm actually writing on the plane coming here and going home. And so what I did is I did exactly what I asked you guys to do, is I wrote what's in each paragraph. So this is a telemedicine project about our on-demand telemedicine program, which is a direct-to-consumer program. And paragraph 1 is healthcare is changing and customers prioritize convenient and one-stop shopping. Paragraph 2 is there's tremendous growth in urgent care and retail clinics, but there's decreased primary care visits. So patients are voting with their feet. They want convenient care. So in response, we developed a telemedicine program. And then our objective is, my main objective is to describe our initial experience creating a direct-to-consumer telemedicine program. We report this experience in alignment with the NQF domains that will be used to create the framework for measures related to telemedicine. So kind of a specific thing that I know I'm doing. I had a little more time to think about the introduction than you did. But one of the reasons why I say, A, write the paper in advance, and B, go back to second grade and write an outline, is because now when I get a minute, I know what I could say in each of these paragraphs. And if I have a half hour to kill between meetings here and I'm not BSing with people in the hallway, I can open this up and pluck off one paragraph. So in fact, that's what I did on the flight here. It's not, well, it is paragraph 1. You see the outline. And what I say here isn't as important as I could relatively quickly splice in what I said I was going to say, and I don't have to worry about the rest of the paper. So here for paragraph 2, which is just shorter, where the concept was growth in urgent care and retail, decreased primary care visits, what I wrote, if you can't read it, is growth in urgent is patients have demonstrated their priorities and preferences with their feet in their wallets. While primary care visits fall, there are over 130 million emergency department and 160 million urgent care visits. Retail pharmacies have entered the healthcare space, and telemedicine is expected to grow to a $30 billion industry by 2020. So I've made the point that, wow, lots of people are using this stuff, or at least I think I have. We have no idea what reviewers are saying because the rest of the paper's not written.
Any questions on introduction stuff? Yeah.
I've heard a couple of different ways of writing introduction, in that you kind of put what you think is going on, which may have been kind of what you did, your ideas, and then you find literature to back you up. Or you kind of go through the literature and put together your introduction like as a piecemeal from what you
It's a great question, and it depends how well you know the area. So I have honestly written whole textbook chapters on chest pain without looking at the literature, because I know the literature. Then when I'm done, I go find 60 references to support what I'm saying. So if you know the area well, don't get caught with 12 million articles on your desk. Write what you want to say. This stuff was without references. There's references in there because, frankly, I cut and paste from other articles that I had for where the references are, so I'll know what they are. If you're doing your first project and you don't know the area well, you need to review the literature first because you have to define your unmet need. If it's your area of expertise, you know what the unmet need is. So it depends on where you are in the maturation of your research or your knowledge base in the area. I find it much easier to ignore the references on the first go-around, because at the end of the day, you're not selling the references, you're selling the idea. And you can express the idea better if you're not encumbered by the way other people describe their own research. So I think great question.
I would add to that also having some idea of the kind of the idea you're looking to support with or discuss from the literature, because if you go into it you go in so broadly, you need to have some sort of kind of search terms and ideas of what you're looking for. So I think having a feeling of this is what I want to be addressing, how has this been demonstrated in literature or not, but going in kind of with your focus questions in the lit review is important to have a somewhat focused review. Any other introduction questions? No? Okay. So moving on to the methods section. In the methods, it is important to really work to provide enough detail for a reader to reproduce the study that you've done. You don't want to handicap your reviewers either. Tell the journal what they need to know to decide. If they say this is just too much detail, they can take it out. But don't leave them guessing about what you've done. They don't know things if you don't tell them, and really you don't want to be making them guess. For people who have gone through the process of submitting to journals, you can get very extensive reviews back, and you can get a favorable review with still pages of suggested or required edits. They like your study, but we're just going to help hone in now how it's being reported here. You win or you lose in the methods. You need the reviewers to understand that you knew what you were doing and that you applied appropriate methods to your study.
So where do papers get rejected? What are the 2 reasons that papers get rejected besides the writing sucks? That's exactly right. So people spend so much time in the discussion. No one, I was a deputy editor for the Annals, reviewer for 8 million journals. Nobody cares about your discussion. What they care about is the question important and what are your methods? Because if you just say something in the discussion that's rambling, they just say remove paragraphs 2 and 3. And if you don't say something that they want to add, they say talk about this. You win on your sales pitch. You win on your first paragraph of your introduction. You win on having an unmet need that's clearly defined and methodology that makes people be able to believe your answer. I've submitted stuff to the New England Journal where I put so much stuff in the methods, like they say 2,700 words. I sent it in at like 4,000 words. I pissed them off, and they said, cut 1,300 words. So I just cut all of my methods, because I've already made it through round 1 and they know the methods were good, and I put them in an electronic appendix and the paper got in. But if you're doing a study that has 30-day follow-up and you're only reporting the emergency department outcomes, well, they don't know if you have 30-day follow-up, and they might want the paper with 30-day follow-up. So you, in your method, say, we have 30-day follow-up, but this paper is only reporting the short-term ED outcomes, which means if they're going to reject that but want 30 days, they could come back to you and say, give me the 30-day outcomes and we'll take another look at it. But if they don't know you have it, and that's what they want, you're out of there. So again, more information lets them make a more informed decision, and more information seldom hurts you unless it's just really bad methodology.
So for people who also missed the reply, because it was a much more succinct and clear, like they don't care or they don't understand what you did, and that was a very clear answer to that. So going back even to Judd's comment here, I don't advocate in general going massively over the word count that they give you. Journals give you a structure for how they want your studies reported. This includes everything from length to section headers to what they want in the methods. use their structure. There's a reason they give it to you. If you don't care about it, they don't care about your paper. And so it is important to actually look at what they ask for, specific guidelines that they need you to report on, for instance, for doing chart reviews or trials. So pay attention there.
What's the one word that summarizes what a reviewer is doing? It's a guess what I'm asking. So triage, sort of. Gatekeeping, definitely. They're actually volunteering, right? They are volunteering. This is some person, one of you, who's sitting there at 8 in the morning saying, I got a really easy day, that all of a sudden gets an article to review. And now they have to do it. And it's unannounced, unanticipated volunteer time. If you make them work, you don't do well. You want to make it really easy for the reviewers to like your paper.
So in general, the things that you're reporting in the methods section, we'll start out with an overall study design. Again, you don't need to worry, write these down, take this. This is the structure pretty much every journal gives you, with maybe slightly different headers. The study design, then the setting. Where did you perform this study? Participants and patients. So in here they want some pretty detailed inclusion and exclusion criteria. Again, remember, you want to enable someone else to replicate your study. Your data collection approach, the interventions, if applicable for your study, outcomes that you'll be measuring, and any citations that can help justify your use of those outcomes. And then discuss the primary data analysis approach. Questions?
So look at the instructions for authors, which will give you, in most journals, particularly the Annals and Academic Emergency Medicine, which are the two you're most likely to want to head to in our specialty, really detailed things about what they want. Pull out, if you're doing an asthma study, pull up 3 asthma studies in the journal that you're submitting it to and see how they formatted. Those people already passed the test. They got in that journal. And look at what information they gave. And I'll just rehash what Kristin said. If you want to, like, for example, the orthostatic paper I'm talking about, everybody could argue over what's orthostatic. We took the AHA-ACC guidelines. Then we could say, we use standardized guideline definitions of orthostatics, reference 22. Here they are. Somebody might not like them, but it's just they don't like them. It's pretty standardized, and almost every reviewer will live with that. They will also know that we collected blood pressure and that we collected pulse, and if they want us to do something different, they could say, can you do a secondary analysis where you look for a 20-point drop or 30-point drop, and they know we could do that. So we give them enough information to know we took guidelines that everybody in theory believes in, but we have enough data to do it however you want us to do it. And hence, there would never be a reason to reject it because they don't like our definition of orthostatics, which is critical.
Group activity?
What do we have group activity?
The methods. Do you guys want to work on your methods? Do you want to skip on to results? We'll go.
Okay, let's go on to results.
On to results. So what do you report in results? The first thing, this is the header here, just the facts. So many people are tempted to put interpretations along with results. Interestingly, we found, we never anticipated, we don't put any of this commentary here. It is not the place. It's really just the facts. So you first begin broad and drill down to your study population. This will usually be your figure 1. So you want to talk about patients approached, patients excluded at any point, and then the ultimate patients enrolled. So they really have a clear idea of what the whole population that has been engaged in some way with your study is. Then you want to give the patient population description for those patients who were actually enrolled. And this is almost always your table 1. So this will be demographics, any other relevant features of the population to your study and your specific question. If you have different study groups, you usually divide this into study groups to show the characteristics separately of them and to compare the groups on any major features to look at, are the groups systematically different in any way. Then in the results, you give the main outcome results first, and then give any secondary outcome results. And then can take a deeper dive into data-driven explanations of findings. And so these may be sub-analyses, not interpretation of findings, though. Again, that does not go in the results section. Anything to add here?
Yeah, so I think I would add that if your paper does not follow this flow, you don't look like a researcher. And that means that you don't get partial credit for things that reviewers may want to know that you may not have commented on. If it reads like every other paper that's published in a high-profile journal and looks formatted and has good English and the punctuation is right, then you get the benefit of some small things. If you don't talk about how many people you approached or how many people you enrolled or what their baseline characteristics are, you're done. You look like somebody who doesn't know how to do research. They just don't believe that this is valid and you could have done it right. So this is, again, this is in fact your methods. You're showing the results which are from your methods, and it lets people see what you did. So let's take the dental pain and opiate study. What's in Table 1 for the dental pain and opiate study? Just yell it out. Okay. How many men and women there are? Age. Okay. And somebody said something in the front?
Insurance status.
Insurance status, right, because that may be related to it. What else? Comorbidities. And which comorbidities? Would you put coronary artery disease in that? Chronic pain, right. So the answer to it is basic demographics. So it's always age, race, gender, always. They got to be in there. You got to know it. You can argue that, I don't know need to know if they're black or white. There are differences from where people are. You got to talk about the population. At some point you have to describe in the setting what's the institution where it was. Depending on your study, it might actually be zip code in something like this that goes to socioeconomic status. And then it's all the comorbidities that you think can be affected or that can impact either dental issues or opiate use. And so, again, you got to think about those things up front, because if you don't look at income or insurance and a journal wants it, you can't go back and get it. And that's why you write the whole paper first, because it makes you go through the process and say, do we have everything? And I actually personally write the paper first, and I kind of have an idea in my mind where I'm targeting. Going back to Kristin's slide, that it's really the balance between perfect epidemiologic rigor and what you could actually do in the real world. If you're trying to go to JAMA or the New England Journal, you better ignore the real world a little and make sure you have perfect epidemiologic rigor. If you're trying to go to the ER literature, we kind of get the real world of emergency medicine, and you can get away with a little fewer or a little more methodologic imperfections. And knowing where you want to go is useful, because you don't have to spend the time and money capturing an insane amount of stuff if you're not going to end up in the place that requires an insane amount of stuff. Anyway.
Questions on results? We're moving to discussion? No. Okay. So for the discussion, and this is, I know Judd feels very strongly about this, get in and get out. Generally, less is more. Don't feel the need to just have a super lengthy discussion, because actually you dilute your primary points usually, and you lose your readers. So you want to first start your discussion. It feels like you just talked about all your results. You're kind of like, we're done there. But actually, the first paragraph of your discussion, you want to clearly then state your findings. This can be with a little bit of interpretive twist then, since you are now in the discussion. But in this study, we found that yada yada, whatever your primary results are, that patients who were black were, only 30% as likely to end up in a kind of permanent dental clinic as others, or whatever it may be that you looked at. So clearly state what you want to be the results that people are really remembering and taking home from your study. You then want to frame these results in the context of prior knowledge and in context of the unmet need. This is going to be more depth than the intro on relevant studies. You may actually, or likely should, pick out a few of the most relevant studies and actually discuss that study and what they had found and how this reinforces or adds to or kind of provides conflicting evidence about. In general, assume the reader knows your topic generally. Don't define diseases and such for them. And again, this is the how do your findings fit in the context of what was known. Then after you get there, you want to highlight the new knowledge, right? So our results fit in prior work that has looked at X, Y, Z. In addition, our results expand knowledge by adding whatever you have now added. And then really, in your final part, you kind of move on to what future directions are. So future work is needed to look at X, Y, Z. Does that make sense? Questions on that?
So I like to think of the introduction, paragraph 2, as where I'm giving the 5 to 10,000 foot view on the prior literature. So I might say, I'll talk about coronary CTAs, which is something I published on. You know, prior studies have shown that coronary CTAs are useful to risk stratify patients in the emergency department, references 2 through 6. In my discussion, I'll say Litt et al. In 1,037 patients demonstrated a 0% adverse event rate at 30 days, and so demonstrated a 0% adverse event rate at 1 year. We now, in this study, extended the findings to 5 years and found no adverse event rates. So it's the same studies, just more detail. 5 to 10,000 feet in the introduction to frame the problem, more discussion. I am now down to 2 pages of discussion in my manuscripts. If you take the New England Journal Guidelines at 2,700 words, you don't have a lot more room than two double-spaced pages, maybe onto a third, and it forces you to be short and succinct. And my mentor, Paul Gannis, who's the guy who told me get in and get out and stuck with me, really worked, is every time you say something tangential, you risk the reality of pissing off that volunteer reviewer who now doesn't like your paper. And at the end of the day, they decide like, not like. And then I can take any paper and find 20,000 things wrong with it. You do it in Journal Club all the time, right? They're in the New England Journal, and you could have a whole list of things. So don't give me incentive to look for a list of things. Just like say the one thing. And you'll see your discussion focused around your goal. If you read that last paragraph of your intro and you discuss anything else in your discussion besides setting that up from paragraph 2, you've just gone rambling, kind of like I am. And so stay focused.
Any questions there? Yeah.
I have a leadership question, but any advice, when you guys are referring to prior studies, do you have, I've seen variations in how people do it. Some people, like Judd mentioned, Michael and all,
Yeah.
Michael and colleagues, or in the past studies show, like, is there a style preference or in the journal, or it's not really a big deal?
It's probably not really a big deal, but again, if you go into a particular journal, just look at a couple articles and see how they do it. That would never be a reason for accept or reject, because they could just say change the format. So I don't sweat that stuff.
If that question didn't make sense to people, it's the question of whether, when referring to a prior study, you might say, as Hollander et al. Found, and then you give the results, and a citation still at the end to that, versus, as found in a prior study, the results, and then you reference.
So we have a very strong recommendation that if the study was done by Rising or Hollander, you say, as Rising or Hollander found. Everybody else is like, somebody did this.
Any other questions on discussion? No. Okay. So limitations. Oh, Ben.
So in the discussion section, what if there's conflicting literature and you have your own personal opinion or your current study sides with one side? How detailed do you have to be in the conflict and portray the historic literature that supports both sides? Or can you just kind of decide you want to support one view and convention only?
Oh, if you support one view, I guarantee you they found reviewers who wrote the other papers. So, you have to, I mean, the whole idea of doing the study is for equipoise. So it's really about your limitations. What makes your study, tilt the balance of the literature one way or the other? And you really need to, I mean, and a lot of times you'll find a difference in the people that found A and the people that found B. The people that did A, I'm making it up, their study was done between midnight and 8, and the people that found B, their study was done in daytime hours. And you just did one 24/7, so it's a better representation of the whole ED. It's how you frame it to do that. But you should know there's this controversy before you design your study, and you should design your study not just to go, oh, it's 3-3, let's make it 4-3, but to say what are the problems and how can you help unify it into one school of thought.
I think to add to that also, as much as if you have, it is okay and I think often helpful if you have some hypotheses about why the difference is, and whichever side your study has fallen into. Our studies were in support of this literature, which we hypothesize may be related to, and then it's a perfect place, right? Future work is still needed to assess and kind of identifying whatever that kind of area is between the two camps. So limitations. Limitation section is an absolute must. The exact location of it in different journals varies. Sometimes it's right after the results before the discussion. Sometimes it's at the very end. It's still really the same approach for everywhere, though. So you want to make sure that you share any study design limitations that you have. And then it's really important to discuss how they may have biased your study, positive or negative. So things like, we engage patients after an emergency department visit to explore, their experience of care, and you recruited them a month after, right? So you've got a lot of recall bias. Maybe, I don't know, if most patients were feeling better, they're going to have a bias towards higher satisfaction than had they been surveyed immediately after they left an emergency department. Or maybe if it was a subset that had returns, they're going to have a bias towards being much more negative about their experience than had you asked them right when they were leaving. So you need to think about who the population is, what the study is, and how different design characteristics may be biasing the results that you're getting.
Good.
So
yeah,
here's another, back to Judd's example.
Yeah, go ahead.
For the limitations, I've sometimes seen where you give a limitation and you kind of try to explain how you mitigated that.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's retrospective, but then we also looked at as an example.
No, so I think.
Yep, so I think a great question and important to do when you can. So the question was, if you identify some limitations and talk about ways that you tried to mitigate them or minimize the limitations, I think that is perfect to talk about them there. And often, really, the end part of the result, people still take their positive twist on it, right? We acknowledge this result we acknowledge this bias that can't be entirely eliminated. These are the factors that we used to minimize the effect of this bias, and here's how we think the bias may have affected. Despite the existence of this bias, these results are important because, and kind of, give their mitigation and then still the kind of positive spin at the end of the limitations, which I think is very appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's great. But I think hitting the combination of the bias and how you tried to mitigate it and how it's explained elsewhere in the literature. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next two slides, but again, this is an example of the outline I had for the limitations for the telemedicine paper. Go to the next slide, where it's actually written in an hour or two on the plane. And in response to your question, look down at the third paragraph, and it says, although patients reported saving a significant amount of time, we could not validate this information, nor did we assess the distance from an in-person visit. Previous studies have shown that patient satisfaction is unrelated to distance. So someone may say, oh, well, where did your patients live? Because if they're really far away, telemedicine would be great, and if they're near the hospital, telemedicine might not matter. So we didn't address that, but we know it doesn't make a difference. So I kind of putting that in there, acknowledging, oops, we don't have it, but somebody else has looked at it, and it doesn't matter.
So last part of the paper here is your conclusion. This will feel very repetitive by the end of your whole paper because you've had your results, you tell them what you found. You had your discussion, the first paragraph of the discussion, you told them what you found. Your conclusion, you want to tell them what you found and what you conclude again. So short, can be 1 to 2 sentences, really just what you conclude. In conclusion, and highlight, like in summary, in conclusion, here it is, my final paragraph. Our study found that, fill in the results of your study. It has to be what you studied. It has to be related to that, back to the primary objective of your study and everything. Do not kind of veer off to a really ancillary finding that you had. And then usually people end that last sentence with future studies should, or future work is needed, or something about what is going to happen related to this study.
Get in, get out, 1 sentence.
2. In conclusion, future work. So don't forget your references. Really try to cite primary sources. I will put it out there that a lot of people do ignore ever looking at the references. But there will be some people who need to or are just interested in looking at what your references are, and make sure that you're citing the primary reference. So this means if you're reading a paper and the introduction of that paper tells you, we know from prior work that only 20% of patients who come to the emergency department with dental pain end up terminally in a dental clinic, and they cite another reference. I don't want to see the paper that you're reading that's citing a reference as your citation. I want you to see you going back to that paper. Now make sure you actually get that paper, read that initial paper. Don't just take their citation and use it. They may have cited some crazy something source. But really take it back to the original work when you can. So this is usually not review articles unless you are summarizing. A prior review has shown, then you summarize the review article, right? Usually not textbooks, but sometimes it is the textbooks. And make sure you format them correctly. So different journals want different formatting, and they will, again, tell you what the formatting is. It's most often APA style, but there's a whole bunch of different reference styles. So just check that with the journal. So now that we've said that, you know how to write your paper. Abstracts really are just little manuscripts. You do this for conferences. You write your abstract often before you've written your paper. Although now that you've learned from Judd that you write your paper before you do your study, maybe you are still writing your abstract after your paper. But they are just little manuscripts. So it takes you through the headers. Again, these are just the bulleted, often even not a full sentence, but the short pieces from each of your paper sections. So they're going to give a very clear objective. The objective of the study, or objective, to study what I studied. The study design you want to make sure is clear in your abstract. You do need to actually identify what design you're using. The methods that you'll be using, the statistical analysis that you'll be doing, brief results and conclusion, and make sure that you highlight kind of in your last sentence of the abstract what the impact of this is. Why is it important?
All right, you want me to do?
Yes.
Okay.
So going to hand this over to Judd to talk about abstract scoring now.
Yeah, we're running low on time, so I'm really going to fly. This is the old SAEM abstract scoring system, frankly, because I just made the slides then, and there are good illustrations. I didn't update it with the new scoring system, which is all the same concepts. So you get points for each one of these things, and really this is what the real world's about. Somebody reads it, and whether they assign you a point or look at it and say good or bad, it's what they do. So, you got to say your hypothesis, and your hypothesis should be something that's clearly testable. And if you look to, the 2.1 here, our hypothesis is that patients over 65 are 2 times more likely to use 911 for medical transport to the ED than patients under 65. I can test that. If I write, we examine the characteristics of elderly patients using our EMS system, it's not a hypothesis. I can't test it. It's not as good. Study design. This is easy. Use words. Okay, here, if you do a randomized controlled trial, your study is obviously better than if you do a retrospective study, which obviously is better than if you do a survey. Simple concept. Do the best possible study design given your resources to answer the question. Almost never is someone interested in a survey of program directors or medical directors. I can't tell you the number of these things I see. I get one every day to fill one out. They're useless. I have no idea what she does in the ED. I know her metrics aren't so good. No, I'm just kidding. But it's hard to know that. So you're getting one person's opinion about stuff that doesn't matter. Don't waste your time on that stuff. If it's an important question, answer it. Go back in the charts and see what really happens to ECMO patients rather than do medical directors think ECMO is important. Then this is really challenging because, again, less is more. You need to be succinct. If you're doing a retrospective study, you need to talk about the criteria for validity of retrospective studies. Now, you may not have time to say, I trained the abstractor, we did inter-rater reliability, and the concordance was great, which are things you need to do, but you can say, we use standardized criteria for retrospective studies, including assessment of concordance, and fit that into your abstract, and it says they know how to do a retrospective study and gives that information. Sample size. The word pilot equals the word rejection. Why would anybody give a crap about presenting your pilot study at a meeting or publishing your pilot study when in the first sentence you've said, this isn't the real study? right? It doesn't work. So make sure you have a real study that's useful, and that's often about numbers. And so you need to make sure you have enough numbers, you're adequately powered. You need to make sure you're using the right kind of instrument to collect data. You need to make sure at the end of the day you can do it. Statistical tests, everybody wrote what the statistical tests were in the abstract. That doesn't really appear to happen that much. But if you're just doing standardized statistical testing, I actually used to just write in the abstracts, standard statistical techniques were used, which shows I addressed statistical techniques, and if I did some logistic regression or multivariate or fancier stuff, then I would say it. But if I was just doing basic descriptive stuff, I'd say basic descriptive statistical techniques. And then this is where, like, if you drift, you're done. Conclusions should be conclusions. You've now only given people 3 paragraphs. If you're concluding something that's not really in there, it's not useful. And then, like, is it important? Because if it's not important, again, it's methods and importance. People could see importance in an abstract. They can't see all the methods. Make sure you're doing something important. And this is data from about a decade ago or more at SAEM that just shows if you did basic science RCTs or cohort studies, you had a really high acceptance rate. If you're doing surveys and other stuff, you had a pretty low acceptance rate. It's probably even more so now as we've gotten more sophisticated. We had originally planned not to interspace the group activities, but we did. So we were going to have you do the intro and results now, but we're running out of time. And then I just want to show you some fun stuff to wrap up, just so that when you get that rejection letter, you don't feel bad. So this is, who knows Deb Howery in this room? Raise your hand. So Deb's a past president of SAM. She was chair of the program committee. She's now a branch chief at the CDC and doesn't attend this meeting anymore. But Deb shared this with me. She used to do this lecture with me. This is a rejection letter to her from her. So she got to open this up to reject herself. I have promised myself that whenever I talk about anything with research, I'll mention something about authorship guidelines, so I am. Residency directors, chairs, research directors, they're not authors. Authors have a standardized set of criteria, and you should feel free to fight with your chairs and call them on BS if they didn't meet authorship criteria. I've done that at various points in my life. I've had people do that with me, and you need to be right-setted. If you're not contributing, you shouldn't be there. I've read over a bunch of her papers. I'm not an author on all of her papers, but I know what she writes about, and sometimes I don't have the time to earn authorship criteria. But as one of my mentees, I'm almost always happy to help and find time to do a quick read of a paper and do something. So right-size this and make sure people are doing what they should. But my maxim, which isn't in the authorship guidelines, is never leave out someone who did more work than someone who's included. And that's really easy. You got a bunch of people that did a lot of work that aren't authors, really hard to tell the chair, yeah, you're an author, but these people that did more work aren't. And so it gives you a good double check to do that. So here are some of my reviews that I've received back in the years when they were paper reviews. This is one of my first cocaine papers where I actually know who wrote this, where clearly 5.7% of all patients who come to the ED with cocaine chest pain do not have AMI, which is what we found. You are manipulating data to overemphasize the incidence, create cocaine phobia, no spell check. Oops. And a medical legal nightmare, also spelt wrong. So I think there was only one person here using cocaine, and it wasn't me. But anyway, you get stuff back that's kind of malicious sometimes. This is actually one of my favorite ones. This was another cocaine chest pain paper I did in the mid-90s, where in 3 points they told me I'm wrong because I disagreed with this guy, who is me. This is one of my more frustrating papers during my time when I was at Stony Brook working with Mark Henry, who's the chair there, who had tons of funding from the state to do really good, motor vehicle crash studies. And we did a great study on seatbelt use, where we assessed what's the impact of seatbelt use on mortality, and it was assessed at the scene in 97 different volunteer ambulance corps. So imagine coordinating this. So we go to JAMA, and they send us a revise and reconsider, which in most cases you think, right, the paper's going to get in. And so we revise. It takes months to revise, really complicated revision. And here's like a pretty personalized letter. I presented your extensively revised manuscript to 2 other JAMA editors. They want another revision. There remains some concern about the accuracy of information, but most of the editors agree that your method of determining this was the best that could ever be done. And they still want revisions. and then we get a totally generic rejection letter with no explanation why after doing that. I drank a lot that night. But I also created a form letter because I wanted to help JAMA out. And so I created this form letter that they could just send me next time. So anyway, there's a whole, unfortunately it's now all electronic and I don't track it, but it was kind of fun when I had all this stuff in files because people are really bizarre. So my point is, don't get upset, don't take it personally. I've had things go through 5 journals and it got published at the journal it was submitted to the first time. It got rejected by the same reviewer at 4 different journals. And he was the moderator for the abstract session at SAEM, which is how I know that. And ultimately, it was academic emergency medicine. They switched editors from Jairus Hedges to Michelle Byros. It was 2 years later. We'd fixed it so many times. It was a much better paper, and it got in without revisions when we sent it back to the first journal with change the title so they wouldn't recognize it. Yeah, you know. So it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And so just understand that. And so the bottom line here is have a tight question, have a right question, make it an unmet need, get your methodology done, have a really crisp presentation, be realistic about selecting the journal, and it's not actually about you, it's about the project. I once had an appeal sent to me that said, you know, I don't disagree with anything you wrote in the reviews, but I worked really hard on this for a number of years, and it really hurts that it's not rejected. Would you guys allow me to appeal the paper? I'm like, really? Because you want it? Yeah, you know, it's like participation trophies. Like, make the paper right the first time and do that. And I'm trying to convince Kristin to join Twitter, so if you would tweet anything about her, that would be really good. So any questions, we're going to stop there. I think we're pretty much out of time. I will say one more thing in conclusion. We did a study here, okay? And what the study was, our introduction was lots of people attend SAEM and feel the need to learn how to write manuscripts. And based on prior knowledge, some people do well and some people don't in the second paragraph. So we actually took a section and involved audience participation, and our main outcome was how many people walked out when Dr. Hollander walked on the floor with a mic. And so there were 6 people who walked out early on. So what are the limitations of that study? I made this up while we're sitting up here. So what are the limitations of that study? How many people normally walk out in the first 10 minutes? I think it's actually less than 6. So it's kind of interesting. And so it takes, like my observation up here, and Kristin says, you just scared a bunch of people out. Might be true, but I was in another session where I didn't ask people to do anything, and I had more than 6 people leave. So maybe I just suck as a speaker. You guys could determine that. Thanks.